this is just going to run continuously, and this is the Arctic ice view from space over the last 25 years, plotted 2 or 3 times a year. And so at the beginning you can see it fills the whole top of the screen, and by the end you find that it's just down in one corner. That's global warming in action.
What's the problem with the thorium reactors? You said they were good. Why has that been done with them?
Sorry, the development stopped in the 1960s.
I know, but why? They're so good.
Money was tight, or the PWR worked, and the government simply chose that and they closed the program. So we're looking at a program that needs 10 or 15 years development before it's going to be available, and that means that it too is going to be, although it's wonderful, is coming in a little too late to rescue the entire fission program. One more.
The big question, how much do you need to do the work you want to do?
Well, to develop the small fusion reactors, we need of order of 500 million to a billion to make a first real working prototype that ticks all the boxes. But you know, like the frackers, there are lakes and oceans of money floating about in the hands of pension funds and banks and the rest. And so we know how it can be done if you work the angles correctly.
Well, we're going to be spending 3 billion paying somebody to destroy our heritage sites over here by doing the windmills out there. That's 3 billion.
What the frackers did was...
That's the cost that Navitas said it was going to be to put those windmills up.
That would put thorium on the map.
We have to pay for that. You and me, anybody who uses electricity is already paying £100 a year per eye.
Question, please.
I'm paying it. They charge.
Yeah, I'll just answer the question. And the question is, where's the money going to come from? And there are many possibilities. The frackers walked around big industry, they walked around the government, and they went straight to the guys who've got all the money in the world. You don't need the government, you can walk past them. Mary.
Are other countries looking at thorium and small fusion reactors? What's the kind of international collaboration?
The international collaboration is quite strong. The strongest thorium entry is the Chinese, who have established a large laboratory with 400 young people in their 30s who are working madly on every possible angle of the chemistry and engineering. There are other groups around the world which are doing private funding, but they don't seem to have figured out how the frackers did it, so they're not raising money fast enough. With regard to fusion, the Russians and the Chinese are both keen supporters of what's going on with tokamak energy. And so technical support, but of course not financial. So we've got tremendous amount of input from them, all of which is valuable in making that first product.
Are there any radioactive byproducts of the fission and fusion reactions?
The fusion reactions don't produce any more radioactivity. They produce neutrons, and neutrons, you know, change elements and can change and build them up, and they can turn things to be radioactive. So as it runs through steel, for example, a few of them get absorbed by an iron atom, and they can turn that into a radioactive isotope. So there's an activation problem, but that's a very small amount. It means that eventually you've got to set aside the reactor materials themselves to wait for that to die away. So we put those in a large repository. Now, just bring up something else, which is that we're destroying the planet in so many different ways. And there's a nice book here by a journalist called The Sixth Extinction. And we're extinguishing species at a rate on the same scale as the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs and the ammonites and all the rest. And, we are doing that. We're killing marine life, we're going for monocultures, anything that stands in the way, ancient woodland, cut it down, put a wind farm there. We're completely insane, really. So we're doing other very dangerous things, quite apart from global warming. Not only global warming, but, global species destruction.
Waste from these reactions. What about the planning permissions for all the small reactors all over the country? It's going to be rather difficult, isn't it?
No. These things will run for 60 or 70 years. There's a bit of activation of a small amount of material. We showed you the size of these nuclear stations is tiny compared to any wind farm, and the amount of materials being used is even tinier because it's just the very core of the whole thing. With regard to radioactive isotopes, the ones produced by fission decay into valuable products: silver, palladium, rhenium, rare earths, neodymium. So, people's view of nuclear waste is completely wrong in this country. Completely wrong. I mean, they've decided on a direction, and it's a direction to bury everything nuclear. It's part of the windmill story. It's an anti-nuclear activity to go for burial of these materials. It doesn't put them beyond use because 500 years somebody will dig it up. It is just an anti-nuclear activity.
I have one question and an observation, if I may. Have you any plan to stop Navitas?
Plan to stop Navitas?
Yes, and secondly, I think one of the most telling diagrams on there was the one of the paths of the liners and the birds crossing at the black spot on your... That diagram should be sent round.
Who cares about a few birds?
It's in there.
We're killing everything.
It is. Well, that surely is a very telling thing for everybody to see, isn't it?
It is if you care about birds, but they're no use. They neither sow nor reap. God looks after them, which is complete rubbish. I mean, they're a vital part, and the insects. They're a vital part of how agriculture and how the whole ecology works. But you're wasting your time when the RSPB and Dorset Wildlife, are being converted to windmill lovers. And say, we've got to sacrifice those birds to save the planet for future birds. If your duty is to save birds, save birds.
You didn't mention concentrated solar power at all, which I thought was interesting, as it's 30 to 40% efficient, and we have 30 to 40 million square miles of useless desert to provide that energy. Also, it could be used to electrolyse seawater to extract your valuable deuterium amongst lots of hydrogen and other useful materials.
Electrolyse seawater.
Fresh water to produce plants and grow grow forests in the desert.
Yeah, that's a sideline as well.
Yeah.
CO2 sink, greening the deserts as well. So it's just multiple purpose system. Concentrated solar panels.
I'm not quite sure what the thrust of the question is, but the website backing up this set of Twitter sites. Twitter sites is news and current activities and contracts being signed and things happening. The background papers are about the studies, and the Americans did a huge study. They've done the best study, obviously. They've got more data on the USA than anybody else has got their own land, all on computer. And the National Renewable Energy Laboratory has done this big study. How can you get 80% renewables by 2050? And it involves damming every stream, taking over every lake, putting windmills on every mountaintop, solar panels, fine, all across Arizona. But they still only produce about 12% of the rate of demand. So they're terribly expensive power. And they come and go at different times, and the east coast can be down, and you've got to have enough wind power to service the east coast and vice versa. And if they're all down, you've still got to have some backup, otherwise people are going to freeze to death.
Deserts are a constant supply of high energy solar radiation, and it's relatively cheap technology.
It's 2 watts that we can pick up per square metre. It's too expensive. It's too expensive.
But surely your fusion reactor, if you're looking to do a prototype, so it's not even proven technology yet.
Sorry, what's not proven?
Sorry, you're talking about needing 500 million to £1 billion to come up with a prototype for your small reactors. So they're not actually existing technology. We know we can build a concentrated solar. We know we can build solar panels and wind and other renewable energies. And part of it, I'm pleased that you acknowledge the problem that we are creating as a planet, and it's not just in the arts.
Okay, you have to read the papers. You have to read the real papers put out by the real people. So if you don't read the NREL reports, you will not understand what you're talking about. It's a belief that you have. The facts are in the report, and what they say is that it says exactly how much of everything you've got to have, how much resource there is that you could use, and it's got to use all of it. But it also involves customer demand, and so you've got to be able to turn people off across the country and say, there isn't enough power, turn your refrigerator off for 24 hours, the food will still be edible tomorrow. And so you've got to have a draconian control system run by computers that turns everything in the country, everywhere, on and off all the time. A windmill starts up in a gust, and something's got to change. And it's just a wild system, and it's very expensive. It's still triple the cost of a nuclear system, and no other countries in the world can afford to do this. And the USA is not the only country in the world.
In Europe,
and it's just not affordable anywhere else.
There's no real way of storing electricity. Somebody was talking about electrolysis. That's only 50% efficient.
Well,
electrolysis of water.
It's not even that. I mean, you haven't stored electricity. You take a feeble source like a windmill farm, and which is already not delivering very much, and you take half of it lost so you can make hydrogen. You're just not winning. You've got to build double the number of wind farms again because you've decided hydrogen is a great idea. It's a bust. On a large scale, it's a bust.
Because in the night time, and you said it yourself, the power stations are running, but they're not actually doing anything useful with that energy, they're just frittering it away.
Well, you've got to
Might
read.
use energy, it might.
You've got to read the papers.
Mm.
Read the papers. We can have a proper discussion.
The problem is that we don't have a proper education system to discuss all of this, which should be an ongoing daily debate on public media, so we have all the options in front of us. But Germany has been exporting solar energy to nuclear France recently, and we know wind works because Denmark had fantastic results. So, you know, and the other thing we're not doing is saving energy. We're not being serious about in Kirklees, where an insulation programme has saved pots of money for people. And we know from Swedish design of passive houses and so on, you can run a house on 20 quid a year and keep everybody warm if you insulate it properly, if you build your houses to passive house standards, which we're not doing here. So it's a huge education process for all these different things. It's not true to say that the renewables don't work, because they do. And the other problem is that with nuclear France, in 2003, they tried to cool the system. They had to shut down nuclear. It was too warm for them to discharge into the waters. They weren't allowed to. And all those people died. Thousands of people died across Europe in 2003. So we're not looking at the whole big picture. And I think
Sorry, who died in 2003?
Thousands of people died across Europe in 2003. A lot of them are very old in apartments because they couldn't cool down. They could not cool. They couldn't cool. If you can cool yourself at night, you can at least save your life. And they couldn't cool them down at night. They were constantly exposed to overheating. And that was partly the problem, was that nuclear wasn't usable in that circumstance. So there are a lot of different problems here that need to be discussed as part of an education process. And it was David King, wasn't it, that said about the concentrated solar energy could, in 6 places in the world, could provide the whole world with enough energy. And he writes about that. Thank you.
Well, Germany, of course, is getting rid of all its nuclear, and it's going to be taken the place of with lignite, and they'll be burning lignite, which is brown coal, and they've no carbon capture technology. So, difficult one.
I've got a nice, easy question for you. On the fire alarm that you showed us earlier, you said part of it was radioactive. How do you dispose of something like that?
Sorry, how do you dispose of?
You know, you said there was this amoricum that's in the fire alarms. Earlier you showed us.
You've never seen it.
Oh, was it? Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, what?
What do you do to dispose of them?
Dispose of?
Fire alarm.
Fire alarms?
Yes.
Well, the amount of radioactive material in those is so tiny that it's perfectly safe to dispose of them in a city dump. There will be no relative.
All right. So it's not like some of
the plastic coating, you know, it's got a lifetime of several thousand years, so
okay.
It's nothing. The worst thing you can do is say, oh, we've got a hazard here, and this is Lithuania did that, and you collect all of the radioactive, faintly radioactive fire alarms you've got, and you bring them to one place. And, and now you've created a hazard that basically didn't exist. If the radiation from something is small enough, then you're safe.
Yeah.
Even if it was able to radiate, it's alpha particles, and the alpha particles don't go through a sheet of paper, right?
Right.
So if you've got a big pile of americium-241 sitting there, a kilo of it, it's quite hot to see it glowing, but you will not receive any radiation at all. It's all absorbed in the air.
Okay. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
So you can create a problem where there isn't one, and you've got to know it's these things, you know, that you've really got to worry about, because they penetrate through everything, meters and meters of stuff. So those are the really dangerous ones that are harder to handle. Everything else, you can fix.
Right, has everyone finished on their
I'd just like to make
quickie?
one comment really. In Germany, they charge the power companies to make them provide money to people whose homes are below par as far as insulation, and every new home or every extension or anything you do, you have to upgrade the insulation of a house, and they're far more efficient than anywhere else. Well, obviously the northern countries are more efficient, but Germany pushes that way.
We destroyed most of Germany, you see, at the end of the Second World War, and obliterated half of the cities. So they've all been rebuilt to a non-Victorian, non-Tudor, non-Stuart standard. And so, you know, they've got a much easier task at doing that, but it is good and self-consistent that they do it.
But you can do it to a Victorian house.
You can
insulate it on the inside or the outside. It costs more than doing a brand new build, but we have so many properties that are so far below reasonable standard. If we only put the money that we're talking about spending on these, you know, the wind farm,
it can be done. There's a very interesting article I read recently by John Constable, and his idea was, you look at what the Victorians did, and the Victorians, you know, they dug up coal, they did steel and iron, they built railways, they built railroads around the world, they built iron ships, they dug sewers in all of the major cities, they put fantastic water storage in London, they put in the London Underground, and we're still using all of those things 150 years later. So those are social infrastructure investments that have lasted 1.5 or 2 centuries as infrastructure. So really, really good value for money. And now today, everything you want to do, because nobody wants to work with a pickaxe in the mud under London anymore, and so on and so forth, nothing is affordable. Absolutely nothing is affordable. And when we do things and we have to spend money, it should be spent on things which are going to last 10,000 years. And the reactor sites, for example, you wouldn't have reactor sites all over the place. You have to design them so that you just recycle the same site all the time. And you build an industry that's going to live for 10,000 years or 1 billion years. So it's a very interesting thought as to how to evaluate what is worth doing and what is not worth doing. And if you have to rebuild your windmills every 15 to 20 years, you know, people are going to get tired of that story, and, well, under 7,000 years, I think. It's a thought, it's another aspect, another view of where we're going, why we're trying to do things.
Right, Bob, thanks.
And I think that was very clever of Constable.
Thanks very much indeed, Brendan, again. And if you'd join me in thanking Brendan for yet another successful presentation.